Hello, welcome to the special first panel edition of Land of Confusion, the Ricochet show for members, by members, where we talk to members. I'm Dave March, I'm host. I'm going to give a little bit of a background on myself. Normally, I'm a historian, I'm a writer, I'm trying to do my first fiction book, but in my spare time, because in Canada, politics is a very small professional class and very much a volunteer class, I am the RNC equivalent chair federally of the Hamilton Center District Association, which is kind of like the Nancy Pelosi district of Canada. So I never win elections. So when people say you're not used to losing, I'm like, dude, I never win. So lately on Ricochet, we've been having this problem where a lot of the posts covering the election are not going to the main feed. And a lot of the shows aren't really talking about what's really going on. And I feel a lot of that's coming because a lot of our guys on the podcast are professors, professional lawyers, or reporters who've never really done an election. So that's why I brought some people together to talk about what's actually happening. And we'll have a little bit of, later we'll talk a little bit about Ricochet itself and how I feel a little suppressed right now. So what as a professional or semi-pro politician, I'm watching election night America. This is like the game is on. I even did like the Carol O'Connor thing from Kelly's Heroes. And I'm watching things and I go to bed at 2:00 at night looking at the results and I'm like, okay, well, I guess Trump's got this in the bag. There's no way you can come back from this. And then I woke up in the morning and suddenly everything had changed. And I kept saying, going on post and saying, this is impossible. What we're watching is impossible. And I've had a hard time trying to explain the analogy to get it across. So when I was a kid, I was one day watching a Canadian football game where there was the league record got caught up to 8 field goals in a single game. And I sat around that day afterwards and thought, wow, what's the math work wise between all the moves in a football game that you could get to 9 field goals? And I realized it was pretty much impossible to ever do that. What we saw in Pennsylvania, what we're seeing in Michigan is a 20 field goal game. And I can't prove it, but there are people who can. And luckily, we had one of those here tonight, and that's Jerry Giardino, the Arizona Patriot. So I'm going to let him take over from here for a little bit.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Actually, first, let's go around and do intros for those of us who haven't met us before. Very rapidly, I'll go first. My name is Jerry Giordano. I'm a lawyer in Arizona, live in Tucson, Arizona, grew up down here. For what it matters, I'm an evangelical Christian, kind of small B Baptist. Basic traditional conservative, right at the middle of the old traditional tent. Married for 30 years, dad of 4 kids ranging in age from 11 to 25. That's me. We're joined here by James Salerno and Mark Lardis, who are, Mark goes by the Ricochet name Sea Writer. Coincidentally, James's last name is also my grandmother's last name, so who knows, we may be related. But let me turn it over to James and let him introduce himself.
Hi guys, James Salerno, my real name and my Ricochet name. I'm from upstate New York, a little bit outside of the Utica, Syracuse area. I would identify as a libertarian, and that kind of led to me being a registered Republican because it's, you know, kind of the best party that's available for somebody who has those kind of principles. And it's not perfect, but I play with the pieces that are on the board, so to speak. I work in the medical industry on like the contract side of things. And I also am very interested in history. I'd consider myself something of an amateur historian. So tonight, as we kind of discuss some of these instances or allegations of fraud, I hope I can maybe add some historical perspective to some of these claims.
Okay, so I guess that leaves me. I'm Mark Lardis. I post on Ricochet as Sea Writer, and my background is I trained as an engineer got a degree in naval architecture, and then went to work doing essentially space navigation at NASA during the shuttle program. And that is a very statistics intensive field. So, my background, I do a lot of statistics. Space navigation is essentially using statistics to find the location of something. And that statistics knowledge bleeds over into a lot of other areas. Additionally, I have been an election worker for at least 15 years, including 10 years as an election judge at a precinct. So I'm used to working elections and also used to understand the various means of fraud. And actually back in 1994, proposed some legislation to a friend of mine who'd been elected state representative that ended up tipping the balance in Texas, which was to require poll workers of both parties to be to work at each precinct. Now the law in Texas is the party that gets the most votes for governor appoints the election judge. The party that got the second most appoints the assistant judge, and the clerks are split between the two parties. And that ended up having an important effect in Texas, because the first election after that law went into effect, all of a sudden, a whole bunch of Texas districts that were formerly very deep blue switched to red. I'm sure that was just a coincidence, but I was fortunate enough to be working in an area that had an honest Democrat election judge when I first started, and he was actually glad to see me. So that's kind of my background and my interest in this.
All right, thanks, Mark. I'm going to run through the numbers real quick. I'm starting my watch. I'm hoping this will take only like 3 or 4 minutes, and I may be talking kind of fast. So I put together a summary. Based on where we stand right now on kind of the consensus calls by the media, and this is consistent with what's been reported out of the states. Biden is at 306 electoral votes. Trump is at 232. You need 270 to win, 269 to tie. So to get back in the race, Trump would need to flip at least 37 electoral votes. 37 would be a tie. And strangely enough, the most likely possibility to flip gets you to a tie. So here's where we stand on the numbers in the states. You may find slightly different numbers elsewhere. I did look this up from my sources just before we started this conversation. So the closest state right now is actually my home state of Arizona, with a margin of just over 10,000 votes. The second closest is Georgia, with a margin of about 12,000 votes, a little over 12,000. Both of those are very small percentage margins. In percent terms, Georgia's a little closer because it's a bigger state. It's 0.26%. Arizona's 0.31% margin. So they're neck and neck. Wisconsin is the next closest with just over a 20,000 vote margin, and that's 0.7%. The rest of them are a lot tougher, okay? We haven't been talking much about Nevada, and we probably won't because it's only 6 electoral votes anyway. And while the margin there is relatively close at 33,000, it's a small state, so that's over 2%, and it's tough to overcome that. Pennsylvania is obviously the biggest single prize on the table, if you will, with 20 electoral votes. The margin there is about 81,000 as of now, and it's 1.17%. That is pretty big. On the other hand, it's the one that's got my birthplace of Philly, and if there's one place where you might be able to rack up a bunch of fraudulent votes, well, you'd probably put Chicago first on the list, and then Michigan is going to be incredibly tough. It's over 154,000 votes in the margin right now. Almost 2.8%. So those are the numbers. The easiest flip in terms of minimal number of votes you'd have to turn over is Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin. You add them together and it's 43,000 and change. So that's really tight nationwide. It comes down to 3 states, 43,000 some odd votes. And that's the strange scenario that would give us a 269 tie. We could talk about what the consequence of that would be. I got some popular vote numbers from a couple different sources. They're still coming in, but it's ballpark 79.7 million for Biden, reportedly so far. About 73.7 million for Trump. So it's a 3.8% margin at the moment. Fairly sizable, not as big as the pre-election polls predicted. Trump did have a big gain. Using that number so far, he's up about 10.7 million votes over 2016, which is about 17%. So he did grow the coalition. That's it for the presidency. Turning quickly to the Senate. You guys probably all know this. Right now, everything's been called. There are 2 recounts in Georgia. The count is 50 Republicans, 48 Democrats. The 2 seats in Georgia have Republican incumbents. So this is, there's only a possibility for a hold or a loss. So we're going to end up somewhere between 50-50 and 52-48 with a Republican advantage. Net result's going to be a Democratic pickup of 1 to 3 seats, depending on how Georgia turns out. There were 3 that were flipped so far, not counting possible flips in Georgia. So my state of Arizona flipped, Colorado flipped. Those both went from Republican to Democrat. And then the Republicans picked up a seat in Alabama, which isn't surprising because it was an unusual circumstance that caused a Democrat to win there anyway. Moving to the House. Okay, so here's where we seem to be so far. This is according to Real Clear Politics. The Democrats have 221. The Republicans have 209. There are 5 that remain to be called. You need 218 for a majority, so at the moment, it looks like they do have a majority. Yeah. Of the 5 that haven't been called, 4 have Democrat incumbents, 1 has a Republican incumbent. So there's more likelihood for a bit of additional Republican pickup here, probably ending up with somewhere between 1 to 3 more. So the ultimate result looks like it's going to be Republicans +9 to Republicans +12.
Yeah.
Something around that. The seats happen. There's 2 in California. In both of those, the Republican challenger's leading the Democrat incumbent by a narrow margin. There's 1 in Iowa that has a Democrat incumbent, and Real Clear Politics have them exactly a 50.0 to 50.0 tie at the moment. There's 1 in New Jersey with the Democrat incumbent and the Democrat leading. And there's 1 in New York with the Democrat incumbent and the Republican leading. I got to back up and have a correction. I'm sorry. The 2 undecided California seats, I was wrong. They're split right now. It's 1 Republican and 1 Democrat incumbent. But the Republican is narrowly leading in both of those. So that's where we are. The one other thing that could be relevant in our discussion, which would get really bizarre, if the presidential election gets thrown to the House of Representatives, where each state gets 1 vote by state delegation.
Yeah.
Here's how that shakes out right now. 26 states have a Republican majority in their delegation. 20 states have a Democrat majority in their delegation. 3 states are tied. And if you're doing the math, you notice that that's only 49. It's because we don't know about Iowa yet. Iowa's currently 2-1 with 1 undecided. The Republicans have the 2 right now, so it's either going to be Republican control or tie. So it looks like, okay, the Democrats can't pick up a delegation. The best they could do is stalemate Iowa. So if it ends up thrown to the House, it's either going to be 27 states Republican, 20 Democrat, or 26 states Republican, 20 Democrat. That's it. Sorry, it took a couple minutes longer than I thought.
No problem. Oof. Yeah, so I believe James, you have something you want to add into that?
Oh, I was gonna say, Jerry, the New York race, is that Tenney and Brindisi?
Oh, you know, it's New York 22, but I didn't write down the name.
I think it is because that's actually my district and they haven't called that yet. Yeah, Brindisi's the Democrat incumbent and Tenney's, I think she's leading right now, but it's still pretty close.
Yeah, that's actually the one that's less close than the others. The number I've got is 50.8 to 47.0, but it seems to have an unusually high number not yet counted. So I don't know what that is.
There's a lot of absentee ballots and stuff that they're still counting. So
Okay.
Who knows? But then, yeah, I mean, if that, I mean, it's a big if, but you know, if this actually for the presidential race, if that goes to the House, I mean, that hasn't happened since Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams, right? I think that's the only time.
No, apparently 1876 and 1877 compromise. I don't know the full details, but that's
No, the 1876 the compromise did not throw it to the House.
Okay.
It accepted all the Republican slates in 3 states.
okay.
And that was Hayes and
Yeah,
Tilden.
it was a good point. That's the other one that was similar to the present situation.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
James is right. I think it's been since 1820 with John Quincy Adams since we've seen an election thrown to the House.
But was
Yes.
the original intention? My understanding, the founding fathers never thought you'd get like what's happened. They always thought it would be regional guys would be fighting things out and get like 6 candidates going to the House.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to see. You read the Federalist, and in some areas they seem to have, you know, incredible foresight, and in other areas they didn't seem to anticipate the growth of 2 parties. So, you know, it's hard to predict the future. Let's turn it over to Mark for a minute, who hasn't commented yet.
Yeah. The one thing I'll say about parties is the reason that they didn't seem to believe in parties is because they were allergic to them. That's the only way I can describe it. And therefore they refused to admit that parties and factions could, could emerge, because everyone would be working for the greater good of the country. Of course, the whole Constitution is premised on the fact that everyone will be acting in their own self-interest, but even brilliant people have blind spots. So,
yeah. Well, let's also remember that they didn't have that many historical examples to draw upon.
right.
They were breaking a lot of new ground. I know you can talk about the Dutch Republic, and, you know, there was some representation in English Parliament, and we can get into, you know, the Roman period, the Roman Republican period. But let's face it, there weren't any examples like us. We broke new ground.
Those were really oligarchies, and I would include the Venetian Republic in that.
Yeah, that's the other one I'm thinking of.
And the Roman Republic, in fact, had the voting weighted towards the wealthy. I think the 100 richest people got 1 vote, then the next 10,000, every 100 of them got a vote, and it went from there. It's a very complicated system.
It was really complicated, and I'd have to, I read Mary Beard's book on that fairly recently. You're correct about what I think they called the Centuriate Assembly, but then there was the Plebeian Assembly and a couple of other assemblies, all of which kind of overlapped and were semi-independent, and it was an unbelievable mess that somehow worked for hundreds of years. But you're right, it was very, whichever way you looked at it, it was really strongly dominated by the wealthy.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of fail safes that they, you know, put in place to prevent, you know, just absolute democracy, which is, you know, that word's kind of, it's always one of my big pet peeves when politicians say preserve our democracy or democracy this and that. It's like we were never designed to be an absolute democracy, and there's really no examples where that actually works. So.
There are plenty of examples where it didn't.
Yeah, exactly.
As the saying goes, a pure democracy is 4 wolves and a lamb voting on what will be for dinner.
There you go.
Yeah.
I do.
Representative republic with a system of checks and balances to protect individual rights, including some of which that are inviolate, doesn't roll off the tongue as well. And we don't have a good shorthand term for it.
Doesn't really fit on a bumper sticker.
Exactly. You guys want to turn and talk about where we stand in the election contests, or do you want to talk? You know, actually, let me jump into this. You may get a kick out of this. When when David EM'd me last night about maybe doing a show, before I was lying there ready to go to bed thinking about these bizarre press conference that had just happened, right? And all these revelations. I started thinking about a good analogy. David came up with his football analogy. I got a different one for the election result overall, and it's Rocky 1. Remember Rocky 1?
Yep.
So, you know, basically here, Trump and the Republicans are Rocky. I know he's the incumbent, but he was the underdog, and we were the underdogs coming in. And Biden and the Democrats are Apollo. And what you got is 15 rounds of them slugging it out, ending up in a split decision.
Yep.
And that's where we are. And then I think we can, you know, Trump really can claim a moral victory here in a sense, because he was not repudiated. He may have lost. And if I had to bet, I would bet that he's going to end up losing based on where we stand right now. But he picked up 10 million some odd votes, you know, picked up House seats, held the Senate, you know, and a lot of these Senate races could have tipped one way or the other. I mean, that great young guy, seems young to me, James, candidate in Michigan. He was pretty close, and I hadn't seen him before until his return started rolling in. He had run the previous I was really impressed by that guy. He looks great. So, you know, we remain a deeply divided country.
Yeah, so I don't think here's something that I've been watching a little bit of when it's been dealing with the polls. There was a guy called People's Pundit that I just only started watching him at the beginning of right before the election. And he's been doing polling in Florida and other places. And he says the real big problem is that most of the pollsters in the United States are in corrupt group think lockstep. And that's why you never saw Trump ever. There's always in polls, you have these weird outlier polls where Trump would be at like plus 20. We had the Biden one at plus 17 in Wisconsin. And of course, we now know that wasn't true. And all these other polls, but they always broke for Biden. They never broke for Trump, ever. And his analysis is like, he polled Ohio, and he's like, I have Trump at plus 8. You cannot get Democrats to plus anything in this state. I have to heavily manipulate the data. And he's just like, the main show tonight, I guess they had the Real Clear Politics guy on. He was like, look, trying to defend this. But this guy is like, look, all these guys are in a group think. They're all in the big, like New York, Washington, D.C. Things, and they're just running suppression polls. But the thing is, you can't suppress the Trump vote, but you can accidentally suppress the Democrat vote. This led to the Democrats dumping ridiculous amounts of money in South Carolina because they thought it was in play, or in Texas, they thought these places are in play, instead of putting the money into the House seats, which were vulnerable, that they didn't realize because they were buying and believing their own propaganda.
Well, can I disagree with that slightly?
Go ahead.
And this relates to statistics, and it relates to something that happened to me when I was working as a navigator. The shuttle program had something called the tethered satellite mission, where they tied a 1,000-pound sub-satellite to the orbiter, which weighs about 100,000 pounds, by a 20-kilometer-long tether. Now, what that did is put the center of gravity of the orbiting system 100 meters above the orbiter. And there were two groups I was doing an independent navigation validation, and then there were the main navigators. And what they were seeing was anomalous data, because it was as if the orbiter was orbiting 100 meters above where it actually was. And actually it was. That was the point it was orbiting about. But since the orbiter was so damn big, it had to be orbiting from the center of mass of the orbiter, not the system. Now, you know, that defies physics. If you guys remember John Walker, he'd probably understand what I'm talking about. But as far as I was concerned, hey, the navigation system's doing what it's supposed to, which is navigating around the center of mass of the system. These guys were freaked out about it and adjusted the data so that the orbiter was it was essentially orbiting around the orbiter instead of the whole system. Now that corrupted the results. I'm seeing something very analogous to this in the polling data that we're seeing, in that there are a large number of conservatives that either do not answer polls or lie about how they're voting. The problem is, how do you factor that into your polling analysis? The only way you can do that is by having a baseline of several years worth of elections to figure out exactly what that bias is. And this is a relatively new bias because there are a lot of people that are actually afraid now to express their opinions. And that hasn't happened in this country prior to about 10 years ago, maybe even, about 12 years. So the polls are skewed because the data they're getting is bad, not because of groupthink. And I'm not sure how you correct the bad data.
Because this guy, he does get good data because he asks different kind of questions and he does different techniques. And he says the problem with a lot of these guys, because of their groupthink, they don't he's tried talking to them. And he gets, they just call him dumb and an idiot, and they won't share it with him because they're in their ideological bubble. They just can't. And that's
and this
the problem.
is the same thing that I saw with the other group that was doing the shuttle navigation. That's why the whole thing just smelled so familiar to me.
Yeah.
Well, it's a particularly difficult problem because you can poll and poll and poll, but you only get to reality check your polling every 2 years. And in a way, you only get to reality check it every 4 years because the dynamics of a presidential election are often quite different than the dynamics of a midterm. So, you're trying to create a model and you have a tiny little number of observations. And then you also know that you're modeling something that's changing over time. The electorate today is not the same as it was in 2012.
Oh God, no.
Demographics have shifted. And then even if you look at some sub-demographic groups, their attitudes have shifted a bit. I mean, most notably, I think what we've seen is white working class moving in a Trumpy direction and kind of suburban mom type maybe moving in an anti-Trumpy direction.
That didn't actually bail her out in the election results, apparently.
I'm not sure about that, but there's at least some evidence of it.
He lost a little bit of that vote, but he still kept the majority of it.
I think it was more highly educated white males moving away from the Republicans.
Yeah,
rather than the soccer moms moving away from the Republicans.
Wasn't white males like one of the only demographics that Trump lost? So
Yeah. Well, there's some good comments about that, though. First of all, whenever we talk about the exit polls, we have to say if the pre-election polling stinks, the exit polls might be just as messy.
Yes.
So I'm sure they are.
Take it all with a grain of salt. I did see the analyses that basically showed Trump picking up votes among minority males and females, and among white women overall, and losing votes among white men. And I think I heard Jason Riley give a great comment when they were talking about, look how well Trump did against among black voters. And he was like, well, yeah, if you're looking at a trend back to 2008, remember who they were voting for in 2008 and 2012. They had a lot of things. And then when you think about the white men thing, and the women tending to ship to Trump, remember who his opponent was in 2016? Hillary Clinton. So, I mean, to me, she's like the Wicked Witch, and like white males are exactly the demographic that I would think would be most turned off by Hillary. And maybe she got a little bit of traction among white females. So maybe that's the reason there's a shift back. No, hard to say.
Okay, we have, I believe, E Herring's coming in. You have your set to mute. I'm gonna unmute you, hopefully. Or you have your. Yeah, you need to unmute your phone there, Elizabeth. Hello?
Did that do it?
Yep,
Yep.
you've got yourself on. You're now live on the show.
Hey, it took some doing. The computer wouldn't connect.
Ah, okay. Well, we've been just talking about like the right now we're at the demographics of and the exit polls.
Yeah, Elizabeth, you want to? My name's Jerry Giordano. You want to do a quick introduction of yourself? We all did it at the beginning, but the watchers could get to know you a little bit.
Yeah.
Just kind of who you are, where you're from.
Okay, I'm Elizabeth Herring. I'm in near the Columbia, South Carolina area. I'm a retired Air Force air defense person, retired lieutenant colonel, and I've been on Ricochet since, I don't know, 5-6 years. I joined because I'm a National Review cruiser who know all the Ricochet founders and hosts, and they kept talking about it, so it got me interested, and I joined, and I've done, I don't know, 12 National Review cruises with them or something. I'm not too happy with them right now.
You're right.
No,
Yeah.
a lot of us are not.
That's why we're doing the show.
Yeah, I know a lot of those writers personally, so I'm a little surprised. It's like, I don't know, were they fooling me all along, or did they not have a clue? My plumber and my electrician seem to be smarter than they are right now.
Yeah, we're the deplorable group, so welcome.
I'd rather be in the deplorable group myself.
Yeah.
I had a thought on that. I did post it, but I don't know if everybody read it. Maybe it's not as clever as I think. I don't think that they've all gone entirely over to the dark side, or like, I don't think we've got an invasion of the body snatchers situation.
Mhm.
But the other possibility is this. I thought of Lindsey Graham at the Kavanaugh hearing. When he said that line, "These people were my friends."
Were.
Yeah.
Reached that point of like, I thought I could get along with these people. I thought they were honest and honorable and decent people. And you can understand, you don't want to think to the contrary.
Mhm.
Maybe eventually you reach a point where you say, no, they're just incorrigible, aren't they? And so maybe a bunch of the National Review guys don't want to think that about the rest of the media.
Right.
It's interesting that Lindsey Graham's, have you heard his latest? That Jayapal wants him to, says he ought to resign from Congress, and Ilhan Omar, you know, the usual cast of idiots all chimed in saying the same thing, and he called them all, that told them they were just a bunch of socialists.
Yeah.
He's mad because he's been coasting into victory every year, and all of a sudden he had to go out and work, and they raised several $1 million to try to oust him. And it's kind of like, when you have a coup against somebody, you better kill him. If not, you know,
exactly.
he's coming back. And I think they lit a fire under him, so we may not see the mellow Lindsey Graham for another year or two.
Right.
Well, they say that a conservative's just a liberal that got mugged. I'd say Lindsey has gotten mugged a couple of times over the last 2 years.
Right.
Mhm.
What was I going to say? Yeah. Yeah, we just that kind of brought me back to the start of when we were starting to talk about polling and how that was so inaccurate. Is because of Lindsey Graham is a good example. They spent a whole bunch of money trying to unseat him, and they had no chance in the real polls that are now that I'm starting to discover out there, and it cost them House seats.
Yeah.
Well, they're people like me. They called me a lot, and I refused to answer the phone.
Right.
Like the old
We
saying
should be
about
thinking-
data, though. It's like bad data in, bad data out. You know, garbage in, garbage out. It's
Yeah, we should be thinking strategically about this. So instead of complaining that the polls are wrong and they got to get their act together, our side should just remember that they don't know what they're doing.
Right.
They're full of baloney. I mean, I can predict who's going to win the Super Bowl, and who cares?
Yeah.
But something really good could come of it, which is, you know, guys like Bloomberg and Soros might think that they actually have a chance to knock off Mitch McConnell or Lindsey Graham. And they
Right.
might throw $100 million into a hopeless cause, which could be spent elsewhere.
Yeah.
That would be a lot wiser for them. So, by all means, let's let them go and,
Yeah.
waste their money on races like that.
Yeah.
We have to remember not to lose hope if the polling tells us things are looking bad. Just say, yeah, maybe, maybe not.
Yeah. You know what? I think that's
Talk to me on election day.
something I came up with my little interaction with Blue Yeti today. He just lost hope. That's his problem. And I think that's a lot of the people at the National Review have their problem is they lost hope. They just don't know. They're reporters. They're in a media world. They don't know actually how, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this is because they've never actually run an election. They report on them, but they don't understand how they work and how what the polls really mean and what they're trying to show them, and all the guts that you have to get into when you're running an election. Polling's great; it helps you in some things, but it's not the be all and end all. And these guys are so obsessed with things that are just a piece of the pie. The fact is, Biden and the Democrats had no ground game. And that was reflected. And that's why I look at what happened and I say, you were only winning this with mail-in ballots. And the mail-in ballots in the previous, like in 2018, or sorry, in the primaries, I heard some places they were rejecting up to 20% of them. The usual average in the 2018 election was 3%. In this election, in many of these states, in Georgia, the rejection rate was 0.24%. They're accepting in ballots that have no verification on the signatures. And like, that's what I kept yelling at Yeti. He's like, well, they did a recount. I'm like, but they didn't do a recount using the procedures that are necessary to win, to detect fraud.
Right.
They took off all the rules for COVID, and then they threw ballots at people. Right now, Loud Crowder is doing better journalism than many of the National Review guys. He found that in Wayne County, 170,000 mail-in ballots have no registered voters. I don't know your system that well, but that sounded pretty crazy to me that no one in 170,000 ballots, you cannot get a single Democrat or Republican registered?
Yeah. Although, Dave, the problem is I have read and seen so many claims on so many sides that it's very hard to believe anything.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even believe favorable information anymore. I'm so paranoid.
Yep.
So, you could say this guy did an analysis and he said such and such, and I'm like, okay,
no, well,
maybe.
in his case, he pulled up the Michigan voter database and was taking you through to see what's actually on their site. Like,
okay,
Are you saying?
what did he do? How could any human being have looked at 170,000 things since election day? There's not enough time to have done that.
No.
So I don't know what he did.
No,
that's the challenge.
Okay, well, you can if you want to, you can watch the video. I won't get into all of it.
Right. No, my point is he could be right.
Right.
But I hear something like that and I say, I have no idea.
Yeah.
And I hear what Rudy Giuliani says and I say,
oh yeah, I don't know what those guys are doing on his team.
And I hear Sidney Powell and I say, well, it sounds plausible, but I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm going to stay straight up. I don't think Dominion voting systems hacked the election. I just don't think that happened. I think this is a process of where some of these states decided to take off all the controls on how to moderate an election, and then they just let nature take its course. So in places like Arizona, definitely Nevada, from what I'm hearing, they just sent every ballot registered address, and there's something like 132,000 dead or people who have not updated the voter database. So they just sent ballots to every address. So there are people who were getting like 4 ballots showing up at their door. And you and I would have, of course, thrown them out or maybe complained. But if you're a Democrat who's been told for the last 4 years that Donald Trump is literally Putin's lapdog, and suddenly 5 ballots showed up at your door, you don't think it's your patriotic duty to save America by filling in all those ballots? I believe people did.
But here's the thing. There should be a check to make sure that one person is not submitting more than one ballot, even if you get multiple ballots, on a mail-in ballot, you're supposed to sign with your name on the ballot. This is at least in Texas.
Right.
And
This
then
is why
there's
you're not having these problems in Texas.
well, yeah, it's more than just that.
Mhm.
My point is that in many of these states, particularly the ones that flipped, they deliberately didn't check that. And, you know, it's again, based on my experience as an election judge, I'd say there were hundreds of thousands of fraudulent votes cast, certainly enough to flip Arizona, Nevada, and probably Pennsylvania as well.
No, yeah, Pennsylvania for sure.
I
And
just wanted
Well,
to add
the real
something to that.
problem is you can't fix it afterwards except by throwing out the election. And while you can do that for a local or state election, there's no process of doing that for a presidential election.
Yeah.
I think we would be justified in calling Mr. Biden his fraudulency if he does become president,
Mhm.
but I don't think there's terribly much else we can do.
Well, there's that's the situation though, is that you have to provide evidence of this stuff. And I think Alito has been sending out signals to Trump and his people, who are of course ignoring it because they're obsessed with Dominion. But he's basically laying out a ground path of, and especially in Pennsylvania, all these votes, the mail-in ballot votes are being treated better than and with less scrutiny than live voting voters.
Right.
Mhm.
And if Trump and his people can get their act together and bring that to the Supreme Court, they're going to say, be able to ask the questions of like, hey, why did you treat all these ballots this way? And then I think the Supreme Court's, if Alito's guidance is, they'll throw out all the ballots that came after 8 p.m. on election day in Pennsylvania. And then the people, then that will give the cover to the politicians to say, well, we got to send in the electors ourselves.
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to come back later to one thing that Mark said, which had to do with not having a procedure to deal with this. Actually, we have many procedures to deal with this, with the certification of the electors and the sending of the certification. But let's come back to that because I know James wanted to say something when Mark started talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, just real quick. I mean, the problem is, I mean, yeah, well, like we know there's some fraud, and then the question becomes how much, and is it enough to overturn it? And I don't think that's like really the most important part. A big problem is the fact that there was, we made quote unquote exceptions for so many of these unsolicited ballots this year when we already have a process for absentee ballots.
Right.
You have to
Right.
request an absentee ballot. And when you get these massive dumps of these unsolicited ballots, like, for example, we saw what happened with Ilhan Omar, and her little like Somalian mafia ring up there in Minnesota, where they're collecting all these ballots from like old folks' homes and intimidating them. I mean, once you get the signature on the paper, there's really nothing you can do at that point. You can't prove that, something like that happened and invalidate those ballots as a result of that. So this is something that we really need to address going forward, because we can't have elections like this in the future where we're sending out millions of these ballots just unsolicited and with, old voter rolls that haven't been updated and this and that and the dead people and all that. And it's just it's not good. It's not a Republican form of government.
I will say we can have elections like that in the future, but it would easily lead from going to the ballot box to the cartridge box.
And again, too, once the government starts doing something, I mean, they don't stop. So you think, is there a single government program in the past 100 years that once it started, it went away? No, there's nothing. So once we establish this as precedent that we can do this with unsolicited ballots, it's
Right.
probably going to be here for the long haul. And that's not a good thing.
Yeah, you want to give Elizabeth a chance to chime in? We guys have been monopolizing things for a while.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I've been enjoying it, but one thing that stood out to me is if you're a Democrat and Biden goes and 10 people show up, then Trump goes and thousands show up, you would be working harder to win that election. They didn't work harder. They didn't work at all. Biden just hid. So if you think that, then you obviously have a fix in somewhere because you feel like you don't have to work for this election. And it's just suspicious to me that the Democrats did not put any effort at all, any visible effort into winning the election. Biden didn't show like he even really cared at all. He just sat home and played tiddlywinks. And that bothers me, that so many people voted for somebody that was so invisible and who didn't even act like he wanted it bad enough to try to get it.
Oh, you didn't need to work hard.
Yeah, that's what tells me there's a fix in. And we all known, ever since I was a kid, I've heard about the vote early and often. We've always known that cheating has gone on. And as long as it was confined to little pockets, people were just willing to tolerate it. But sooner, it just has grown and grown over the years. There have been some famous elections where they cheated rather wildly in it and won. And now we have this one, which I don't think that we can heal from. It is so blatant and the craziness in it. And to me, when these people roll over and say, well, everything that Trump's bringing up wasn't enough to change the election. Well, that's like tolerating corruption. If you're saying we don't care unless it changed the election, well, that's tolerating it, and it's going to continue to grow because nobody's pushing back like Trump is right now.
Well, why don't we talk a little bit about the strategies or the possibilities for how this might get flipped, which I have to say, I still consider that something like drawing an inside straight, and maybe tougher than that, but probably tougher than that.
Okay.
But here's my general thought. You know, Pennsylvania's got the biggest gap of the states that it might be worthwhile to flip. So let's put that one last. How do you flip Georgia? They just did this hand audit count. Now, I know it wouldn't have picked up fraud in stuffing the ballot box. It should have picked up fraud in the Dominion software.
Yeah.
And that was not demonstrated.
Right.
Which doesn't prove that the Dominion allegation is without merit everywhere, but it makes it pretty implausible in Georgia. Because you could have done it in some states and not others.
Right.
Okay.
You're talking about that.
We can get to that. So, you know, what's the path to flipping Georgia? You'd have to have some evidence of stuff in the ballot box, presumably in the Atlanta area. And I don't know if they've got that.
Yeah, you have to look at it, the Atlanta area. That's where your problems are. And also, remember we had the riots there after the shooting. So all of that played in, and people were motivated, and you know, how much cheating they were willing to do, I can't say because I'm not from Georgia, but I just don't know about the Atlanta area and the rest of Georgia, because Atlanta has been growing. It says if they put in another perimeter road, it would be 500 miles around. It's just such a big area if you've driven through it. It's scary.
One thing that raised flags for me is the exclusion of poll watchers, particularly those that did not belong to the party that was doing the counting in Atlanta. And actually, you saw that same pattern in Wisconsin and Michigan, where you had dramatic flips during the periods when there was only one party counting the votes. I think that in the future, there has to be a law that says that representatives from at least the two major parties have to be present when the votes are counted, or those votes will be tossed out.
Correct.
You know, just they're presumptively corrupt. I don't know. I think you can do that. I think you can do that in the same way that they outlawed the punch card ballots after 2000.
Well, enforcing it becomes a problem. I mean, this was a problem in Pennsylvania, and they had a law saying that they had to be something like in the room. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, I skimmed the decision. It was pretty outrageous. It effectively said, even if the room's the size of a football field, The legislature just said in the room, so anywhere in the room is good enough. You know, really, it was pretty sad, and it was a 5-2 party line decision, and it's 5 Democrats on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and they're elected.
Yeah.
So you know, ugh. But we should
That'll
finish
never
Atlanta.
change
So
that.
Mark, your idea is maybe there are some vote counting irregularities in the Atlanta area that could flip that thing. It's roughly 12,000 odd votes right now.
Possibly, but the problem is I don't think there's a mechanism to do that currently exists.
There is a mechanism.
Okay.
They just do what they're supposed to do when they did a forensic audit, and that they refused to do. The Georgia Supreme Georgia, from what I can tell, is still a very much an old style Tammany Hall operation, but it's being run by Republicans versus being run by Democrats in the big cities, except for Atlanta. So those guys there don't like Trump. They don't like him cramping their style, and they don't want him. They're also, like, I was talking to a guy named Robert Barnes. Well, I didn't talk to him. I had some emails. And he basically said he was one of the Trump lawyers who went down to Georgia. And he said, I talked to this guy. He promised he was going to give me that kind of hand count with signature verification. And they lied to me. And the reason they're doing this is in his mind, he doesn't want, that guy has no incentive to do that, because if it turns out they have been defrauded, he just ran an election where there was massive fraud. So he has no incentive to cooperate.
But you can't do a hand recount with signature verification.
You
I
can't,
mean,
but
as I
you do
understand
but
it-
there's like
No,
there's an
hold on,
audit
let me finish.
process. You
Once-
do
hold on.
enough.
Once you verify the signature for an absentee or mail-in ballot and take the ballot out, it's my understanding, and it may vary from place to place, that you take the ballot and you put it in one place, and you take the envelope and you put it in another place, and you don't know which ballot went with which envelope.
Correct. At least
And
in
so,
Texas.
and so what do you do? Like, you can't unscramble that egg.
Well, I don't think
Right.
that's the unscrambling part you want to do. You just want to look at the signatures and to see if there's matching signatures between different ballots, or
Okay.
if these ballots had signatures. I think
Okay.
those are the things we want to know, and they're not allowing us to see that, and we're not allowed to have poll workers of the Republican Party see that. So there's I think that's what they wanted. The Trump lawyers were trying to get it, and the guys are just like, hey, we don't like you guys coming down here and screwing with our stuff. And
No, I will
I
point
think
out.
there,
I will point
ahead.
out that in Florida, they had a big problem in Miami-Dade and they cleaned it up.
right.
And for some reason, Florida went as expected.
Yeah,
Well, even
Florida had a lot of
Miami-Dade-
pressure on them now, I think, right? Because I know, like, historically,
Mm-hmm.
Florida's, especially like Broward County area, they've always had problems. And
Right.
I know that they kind of had their feet to the fire this year to run a clean
Yeah,
election.
they
And
got rid
Florida
of
had
all the people
results
there.
in that day. Yeah.
Okay, so
The other thing I think will be the solution. This is not just a legal solution. There's also public pressure. There's going to be 1 million people showing up in Georgia tomorrow for the rally. And these Republican guys are going to have to answer to their own voters in a way that I don't think they're used to. And I think that could bring public pressure, will have effects on them in regards to this situation that just a pure legal strategy does not.
okay,
I
so
don't think they have the fortitude to be in the middle between the Republicans who are marching in mass and the Democrats who are burning down businesses in mass.
Mm-hmm.
So to wrap up Georgia, it sounds like here's where we are. The Dominion thing doesn't look like it's going to matter in Georgia. There doesn't seem to be much in old-fashioned ballot box stuffing, in the sense of just straight up fraudulent ballots being brought in trucks.
Mhm.
But the potential path forward could be challenging the validity of signatures on the absentee ballots. And if you can find a high enough percentage that are invalid in some areas with a heavily Democrat vote, you could say, statistically speaking, that would be 20,000 votes in error.
Right.
And then that would at least be a plausible argument for saying this count isn't good enough.
Yeah.
So I think that covers Georgia. Let me speak to Arizona. I don't have much in Arizona. Now, unlike Mark, I'm not an election official myself. Strangely, my mom and my stepdad are. They've been working the polls for years, so I got a little secondhand information. It actually Dominion may be the angle in Arizona.
Huh.
Because I posted on this, it's weird details though. And there's so many details that you can't chase down all the rabbits, right? But on this one, there's one and only one county in Arizona that uses Dominion, and it's Maricopa. And that's the Phoenix County, and it's over 60% of our population.
Right.
And that's the one county that unexpectedly flipped. It's generally been Republican for a long time, and it's Biden reportedly won narrowly in Maricopa, which is a little suspicious. And in Maricopa, they've got a new county recorder who's the one that runs the county elections, Democrat for the first time in something like 20 years. He beat the Republican incumbent lady who'd been in there for ages. And the other downside in Arizona right now is while we have a Republican governor, we have a Democrat Secretary of State who's the one that actually runs the election stuff at the state level. And so if I were Biden's, say I were, the evil genius for Biden who wanted to flip the election, and I had this like Dominion toggle that I could flip, Maricopa County would be a really good place to flip it. Because and plus we have a really, really harsh recount rule in Arizona. It's 0.1% to trigger an automatic recount. Otherwise, forget about it. So I don't know, it's a long shot, but that's how I see things getting flipped in Arizona. We've been doing mail-in balloting since the early 90s. It's been running 60 to 80% of our votes since like the 2010 general election. We know how to do this.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we were swamped with something that we weren't ready to handle. So maybe that's the reason they're playing the Dominion angle, is you lose it everywhere else, but maybe you get it in Maricopa County and you flip Arizona.
Yeah.
It's the only way I see to do it.
I don't think the problems with the mailing voting were incompetence. I think when they mailed them out in the blind, that they were opening up the door for corruption, which is a different thing altogether than incompetence, which merely implies training and more assets.
Yeah.
I'll just add to that. I know I didn't have as much time to prepare, so I don't have all my stats like you guys do and everything today. But just as far as like the way I look at it is there's just there's certain things that kind of just don't pass like a general smell test. And what I'll say is if we had right now, instead of Trump, if we had like a Wilsonian-esque foreign interventionist president, and this election happened in Ukraine or Sudan or somewhere like that, we're sending the military over. So if it's, exactly the same thing, but in a different country, and if we're doing that, something doesn't smell right.
Yeah.
And I was watching Ron Paul. He was on sometime this week, and his co-host was like a foreign elections supervisor. I don't know what the technical term for it is. And he said like the cleanest elections he's ever seen. They're all, they don't use like this software stuff. Yeah. And every time they bring that in, it always brings up red flags and re-audits and things like that. So.
Okay. What about Wisconsin? If Trump's going to get it, so we talked about Arizona and Georgia. For him to get it, he's got to flip Wisconsin or maybe Pennsylvania. How do you get Wisconsin? It's a 20,000 vote margin.
Apparently, they are going to do the proper audit there, and they have actual rules. And apparently, there was an emergency meeting a couple days ago with the Wisconsin Board of Electors, those people. I'm not too sure exactly how it works, but they tried to change the rules to make it harder for Trump to do a recount and to do an investigator recount. So I don't think I haven't. None of the people I watch who would normally be freaking out if it went the wrong way were freaking out today. So I think they were unable to do it. So we're going to have a proper functioning audit in the 2 Democrat counties that seem to have there. So if there is going to be one place we'll get to see if this works, it'll be Wisconsin. And
Okay.
it looks like they're having the same problem as some of these other places, just willing to accept mail-in ballots in without the usual checks, and just accepting ballots that were just like, you know what, just letting them through. And I think that's another situation. I don't think it was happening in some of the other states, but some of these others, but we're just seeing like in Georgia where they allowed 30 times as many people to get through this, past the smell test.
Were there a lot of mail-in ballots in Wisconsin? I just don't know.
I think so. They're also a state that's normally used to it. Like they're like a Washington or an Arizona. So we'll see exactly what happens there. So hopefully it does flip. But the thing is it's Milwaukee County and the counties around Milwaukee that just delivered a 95% turnout when the rest of the state's giving like 75. That's the problem. They had a 65% turnout in there, and that's like what he was saying about Ukraine and Zimbabwe and those other places. You don't see 100% turnouts even with mail-in balloting in a pandemic.
Okay, Dave, here's my response to that. Maybe, here's the sad thing. Until I've looked at those numbers myself, I don't believe it. Because I've seen totally bogus figures on our side. Doesn't mean your source is wrong.
Yeah.
But I've seen people that just made junk up.
Yeah, that's true.
And so we got to be so careful. There is unbelievable fake news nonsense coming from the left-wing media. No doubt about it. And there's a lot of right-wing fake news nonsense also.
Totally true.
So Wisconsin, now I just Googled it. So it looks like there is a court ruling that they can't count mail-in ballots received after Election Day.
Yeah.
And I remember during the press conference yesterday, there was some talk of an affidavit of someone who said she was instructed to backdate. Do you guys remember that?
Yes.
Yeah, I have heard
I
some
think
of
there's
that
a
stuff.
few instances of that. Yeah, where we have more an affidavit.
What I don't remember is whether that was Wisconsin or not. And so that's the sort of detail that I need to track down.
Yeah.
And say, is that where, here's another example when I see you float the idea, there was a bunch of fraud in Milwaukee. Okay, maybe. But when someone says that, I ask, have you looked at the Milwaukee vote totals in 2016 and compared them to 2020? I haven't done it for Milwaukee.
Okay. Well, that
When
was
I
one of my
talked about my
sources.
state, Arizona.
My source is the pollster, and he said in this case it was last time was in 65% in Milwaukee, and then this time it's at 90. So that's why.
That's the turnout they're saying, right?
Yeah.
Turnout is up everywhere.
Yeah, and that's the thing too.
But were there enough was there enough Biden vote pickups compared to Hillary votes in 2016 to say, gosh, that looks weird? Because when I looked at Arizona, I said, look, I targeted a specific state, and I know it went one way last year, and it flipped.
Yeah.
And so that was weird. And if you want to look at Wisconsin, you got to say, what was the margin of victory in that county? Is it suspicious that it got big?
So
I just don't know.
The analysis I was hearing was something to the fact of like everywhere else in the state we're getting the Scott Walker results, but in Wisconsin in Milwaukee the Democrats are outperforming Barack Obama in 2008, and there's not enough of that vote to exist. So hopefully it comes out in the wash.
I forget who won Wisconsin in 2016. Did Trump?
Trump did.
Okay.
Similar margin.
Now,
You got another person coming in. I'm going to let him in.
Why would all those people in Milwaukee come out in extra numbers to vote for the party that burned down blocks in their city? That's what I want to figure out.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're nut jobs.
Yeah.
because we're fascists and Donald Trump is Hitler, who's an existential threat to the republic, which is sort of, it's 4 years later, he's been in office, the republic's still here. You know, I don't know how he's an existential threat.
Never underestimate the herd.
In 4 years, but they're crazy.
Yeah.
You know,
I think the root of this, that it's a lot easier to fix the media problem than it is to fix voting problems, because the Constitution gives the states the right to pick how they select who their electors are going to be, and that's what they do. But the media has been ganging up on Trump the whole time, putting these images in people's minds about what kind of person he is. So some of them who are probably good people probably had no qualms about cheating and doing all these things because they thought it was better for the country.
That's what I think too. So we got Mule Skinner's joining us from Nebraska, and Mule Skinner, why don't you give us a bit of an intro for all the folks who?
Yeah, I'm Mule Skinner. I am from Nebraska, work in government, vaguely, in and out. Anyway,
well, welcome.
Yep.
I think we were on. We've talked about how to flip possibly Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
At least theoretically. Mm-hmm. The other big one to talk about is Pennsylvania.
Right.
Now, as I mentioned at the outset, it's a much bigger gap. It's 81,000 some odd votes. So you know, it's a tougher number to hit. But how do you do that?
I think the solution we talked about earlier with Alito, and that's the one where they come in and say, we have 300, you accepted all these votes after the election day against the ruling of the legislature because your Supreme Court did that. We're overturning that decision. And because you've unfairly treated mail-in ballots better than live person. And I would even argue, like, why does a live person can't come in 3 days after the election if you're allowing mail-in ballots to come in? I think there is some great discussion, and I think that could come down as a decision, say we're invalidating this stuff, and then they were told by Alito to separate the ballots. It sounds like they didn't, and then Alito's going to be saying, well, you ignored my orders, so I'm hoping that that's the Supreme Court angle. And then it will give the cover to the legislature to then say, well, we can't hold another fresh election, so we're just going to send electors in ourselves. Okay.
There's a couple issues in Pennsylvania. So yeah, the late received mail-in ballots are one. I think a second one would be the irregularly processed mail-in ballots. It's this thing with something called naked ballots, and we can get into it a little more. I just want to summarize right now. Right. Then there's just possible out and out fraud of, fake votes being given. I think that's what's in play in Pennsylvania now. And then there's sort of I didn't get to watch what was being counted irregularities, which is a tough one to make out. Let me toss out some facts, and then I want to turn it over to everybody else. So on the question of the votes that arrived after the election day 8 p.m. deadline set by the legislature, which the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said we're going to extend 3 days, and the U.S. Supreme Court might throw that out. Mm-hmm. The reporting is that there's only 10,000 of those. And I did a post on this too, some things in Pennsylvania, so I got numbers. There were over 2.6 million mail-in ballots. And Pennsylvania's saying that only 10,000 of them were late. 0.38%. Pennsylvanians were 99.62% timely in returning their mail-in ballots. Do you know any group of people that's 99.62% timely?
Democrats?
Yeah. Democrats can't start a meeting on time. I'm worried Mule Skinner's a Democrat. I'm teasing you. You probably didn't get the message until late.
I'm going to give you guys
a joke, right? Democrats say they're going to meet at 7, and it's 7:45, and they're still walking in the room.
Right. But the minutes say that it started at 7.
It's timely.
Yeah.
But the minutes say it started at 7.
Yeah. So I have a good analogy or story about this. So in the World War II, the British had the SOE, and they're trying to drop in paratroopers into the Netherlands, and they keep thinking they think they've got information come back to them that their agents there are compromised. So they bring in this expert guy on radios and to start trying to look at the signal information, and eventually he comes back to them and he says like, yeah, all your agents in the Netherlands are compromised. They're all being controlled by Germans. And he's like, and the guy in charge is like, how's that possible? They always send in everything exactly correctly every single time. And the expert's like, yeah, only Germans can be that efficient.
Yeah. And I can tell you, maybe if it were Wisconsin, there'd be a lot of Germans, but I'm from Philly and there are a lot of non-Germans in Philly.
Yeah.
So that's one piece for the Philly fight. I think there are, there's the naked ballot question.
Mm.
I got a little bit on it. Does anyone else want to talk about that if you're familiar with it? Okay, let me explain what I understand about it.
Okay.
So apparently in Philly, and this is like Arizona, when you send in a mail-in ballot, there's an inner envelope and an outer envelope. And you got to take your ballot, you stick it in the inner envelope, and you seal that. I assume you sign that. That's what we do in Arizona, although nobody's told me that. Like, you got to fill out your information somewhere. Then you put that in the outer mailing envelope, and then you drop that in the mail. And so the idea is, and Trump's legal argument is, if an envelope arrives and you open it up and all that's in there is a ballot without the security envelope, no good.
Right.
You're supposed to not count that.
Yeah, we wouldn't count that here.
And
we do
the
have
claim
mail-in ballots
is,
in Canada for
the claim is that they've counted a lot of those.
Mm.
And the claim is also, I think there's three different claims. One possibility is they may have counted those in the Democrat areas, Philadelphia, maybe Pittsburgh. Second claim seems to be, even in advance of the election, maybe they were trying to figure out if that was the case with these ballots, maybe by weighing them. The rule was you weren't supposed to open them until election morning. But the idea was instructions went out in the Democrat strongholds that when you opened the ballot, a mail-in ballot, and it was a naked ballot, so you were supposed to throw it out, then you tell somebody and they track down the voter and they let them come in and vote a provisional. And I don't know whether this might have happened a lot. This is one of the allegations. And so the idea there is they're cheating by picking up votes. And these are the instructions that went out in the Democrat areas, but not the Republican areas.
Mm-hmm.
So it's trying to tie into the equal protection argument that was used in Bush v. Gore.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty clever argument.
Yep.
So
It's
that's the second ballot possibility.
It's Cloward and Piven. They flooded the mail-in ballots with so many that it's impossible for them to trace down. So they probably just gave up. That's, just inject confusion into the whole thing by overloading the system.
Yeah. The challenge is, hey, Judge, they injected confusion by overwhelming the system. Isn't going to get anybody to overturn the election.
Yeah.
We need more than that. I'm trying to figure out, how do you get there?
Mm-hmm.
Now there's also arguments that they're making that a whole bunch of ballots were counted when our guys were kicked out of the room.
Oh, yeah.
And so there could have been who knows what kind of shenanigans there.
I would like
and
to
maybe they can get some affidavits saying that there were shenanigans, and maybe they've already got them.
Yeah, I think they do. I want to say, first off, as a Canadian, we do have one. Our federal parties does have a mail-in balloting for that. I'm required to send a copy of my driver's license along with a ballot to prove that I'm doing this, and you guys just get to get away with a signature. That's crazy.
Well, because that's racist here. So.
Well, no, it's just like
Yeah.
anyone who says that, I'm just going to be like, I'm sorry, Canada's not a racist country. We can do this. You can do this.
Exactly. Yep.
Oh, Dave, I got to make fun of you.
Yeah.
What a typically Canadian thing to do. Send in your driver's license. What? So they can match the picture to the envelope?
Not
Yeah.
only that, you can't drive until
I
after
know.
the election.
It would show that you had a license with the right name or could forge one, but
Yeah. I mean, just some of the stuff that's happening down there. I have friends who've slept with ballot boxes to protect elections integrity. The idea that at 10 o'clock or 2 in the morning, they said, everyone go home. No, that's not how this works.
Yeah,
Mhm.
agreed.
If Elections Canada, I've said this repeatedly, if Elections Canada had walked into any of our polling stations and told us to leave like they did here, I'd be in jail. I might be calling you to bail me out. I don't know if you work in Canada, but like, because I would have punched the Elections Canada person in the face. Like, this is not normal in any other country that calls itself a first world nation.
It's
I have
not
been
normal
stressing
in the
that a
United
lot.
States either.
Yeah.
Mhm. In Mexico, I've seen the voter IDs from some of the ESL students that I had when I was teaching ESL. They look like our driver's license. They have pictures, they have birth dates and addresses, they have holographic seals, and the signature you can match. That's a voter ID. And
Mhm.
here, it's a joke.
Right.
this might be a good segue into another issue because it ties to what we just talked about in Philadelphia and the idea of getting witnesses. So one of the frustrations that we've been seeing on the site today, especially with National Review kind of turning on the situation,
Mhm.
and there was even a report of Tucker Carlson turning on it, though when I read the transcript of his talk, it wasn't as bad as suggested by the headline.
Mhm.
You know, Tucker was like, Sidney Powell needs to give me the evidence now, and I invited her on the show, and why wouldn't she come?
Mhm.
And it's like, Tucker, do you think you're the center of the bloody universe? How many people are contacting Sidney Powell? We requested information from her and she didn't get back to us. I'm like, dude, she's running an unbelievable major. It's not just one piece of litigation. It's a bunch of cases. I'm a lawyer. I do this.
Right.
This is hard. This is the sort of stuff that would normally take a year and a half.
Right.
And they got to do it in a month. And they got public pressure. And now, apparently, Tucker Carlson and every other journalist on the planet has the right to have the lead attorneys drop whatever they're doing to respond to their requests for information. It's like, guys, that ain't how it works.
Right.
And then there's another issue of why haven't they released the information? This is my job, okay? When you are a litigation lawyer, you usually don't release stuff until you have to.
Mhm.
Okay, unless there's going to be discovery requests, perhaps automatic disclosure obligations, depending on the local court rules. If you've collected affidavits, you're going to have to turn them over.
Mhm.
In some jurisdictions, you won't have to turn them over unless you're asked, but the other side would be incompetent if they didn't ask. Okay, so you got your information, and there's going to be a deadline, and you got to give it to them, but you don't want to give it to them early. Unless you know it's gold.
Mhm.
If you know it's gold, you disclose it up front. In fact, you do what Rudy did with the ones he was citing. You attach it to the complaint, which is not what you normally do. But if it's gold, that's what you do. Usually, you want to play it close to your chest. You want the other side to make mistakes. You don't want them to know what you have, so that, for example, you can catch their witnesses in lies, with them not knowing that you've got a document that contradicts what they're going to say.
Don't
There's
reveal
another
your
major issue. Say you got 20 affidavits from people saying, I witnessed voter fraud at such and such a location. I was a poll worker or an observer. Okay. Remember the hilarious press conference at the Four Seasons in Philadelphia? The landscape company Four Seasons? It's just last week. I got a hoot out of it.
Mm.
Okay. The one that was down the street from the sex shop and the crematorium. Which, why would that's all over the press? They're nuts. But there was something substantive there that was important. I don't remember the guy's name, but there was one guy who was brought in who was one of the witnesses. And he was like one of the Republican observers. And he was making the complaint about what had happened, that he wasn't allowed to witness what he was supposed to be witnessing. And then the news reports say he's a convicted sex offender, which apparently may be true, that he had like some sort of indecent exposure conviction way back in the 90s. Okay? If you tell the other side who he is now, they can try to dig up that kind of stuff. Also, if you turn over all your witnesses and affidavits now, before you've vetted them, the other side can say, hey, look, you know, this one beat his wife. You know, they can try to discredit your witnesses in the court of public opinion too. Okay, so what you want to do is be careful and vet your people and target them. And if you got 20 witnesses, maybe you call 20, but maybe you call the best 3. Okay, because after 3, it gets pretty repetitive.
Right.
And juries and judges get pretty bored of hearing the same testimony over and over again. In big cases with multiple locations, sometimes you have no choice. But you got to exercise. I mean, I've been doing this for 22 years. You got to exercise discretion. So this is a really good reason for Giuliani and Powell to be playing their cards close to their chest. Okay? Think about it like this. You got a few really good witnesses, and you got some that got warts, and maybe they can be beat up. If it comes out late, the other side's going to be going in front of the judge. Here's the difference. Dave, say it's you, you're on the other side. So you're Trump's lawyer, and I'm Biden's lawyer.
Okay.
Hey, judge, here's Joe Blow. They gave an affidavit for him, and it turns out he's a convicted sex offender who just vacationed in Thailand, and we think he's a pedophile. And by the way, he's ugly and his mother dresses as funny. And by the way, I got 3 witnesses saying he was in Jamaica on election day. And then Dave says, Judge, I'm not calling him as a witness. I mean, I turned over his affidavit, but what, you want to do collateral impeachment of the credibility of someone who I'm not even calling?
Right.
So that's why you hold things close. Okay, now I understand, you know, the National Review guys. Okay, someone like David French should know that. He's a lawyer. He's not National Review anymore.
Right.
French ought to know that. You know, Kevin Williamson, Rich Lowry, and who's a lawyer at National Review? Andy McCarthy is. He's a really good lawyer. I haven't heard him chiming in on this in a negative way yet.
Right.
So there is an area where, you know, I know how to do this. Lawyers know how to do this. A few non-lawyers, it's not like it's impossible to know it if you're not a lawyer, but you have to have specialized knowledge.
Right.
So I hope that helps everybody. There's a really good reason for Trump to unfold the strategy the way it is. Of course, it's also possible that he's holding a busted flush. And
yep. And a lot of this is a bluff.
Dan McLaughlin's weighed in, the baseball crank. He's a National Review contributor. And Ed Whalen.
What have they said?
Dan McLaughlin, he's not supportive of of Trump at this point. He's starting to fall along the line of, you know, this guy's a joke doing what he's doing. And Ed Whalen's starting to follow behind him in the same way. I got the election issue, and instead of being against Trump this year, it was hell no, maybe, and well, he's better than the other guy were the 3 articles. And I just shook my head. It's like, aren't they in for the fight? Don't they know what we're up against? The strong ones on that are David Harsanyi, who I've never met, and of course Victor Davis Hanson and Jack Fowler. They do Jack Fowler hosts one of the podcasts with Victor Davis Hanson, and Hanson I've been right like paired with him in thinking the whole time and agree with what he says. And But Jack Fowler was the publisher. Now he's vice president for the whole National Review Institute. But their podcast is the one that's closest to the way we think.
Okay, good.
Somebody chime in. I talked for way too long.
Yeah, well, we were going to get on, if we want to get back to the how to fix things, I believe we still have to cover Michigan. I understand it's the biggest vote, but I think that's the one that will most likely be. Trump met with the legislators today to talk to them about this. I don't think they would have gone to the White House if they aren't thinking about it. I think that won't be, especially after the threats that came against those Wayne County people. I think that was kind of the drawing line where you can't threaten our election officials by threatening their children, from what I understand.
Ooh.
Like, I think that one, especially when you hear, it's kind of forgotten now because it didn't happen, but Marco Rubio in 2000 was the leader of the State House in Florida. And he said he had it all running down the rails, ready to go. If the Supreme Court had gone against, had ruled in favor of Gore, they were going to just overturn the election results and send the delegates in themselves.
Wow.
So this nearly happened 20 years ago. And given the kind of weird shenanigans coming out of Michigan and all the hatred of that governor there, they started an impeachment yesterday.
Okay, here's what I know about that. It's coming out of Wayne County, Michigan, right?
Yep.
Which is the big county. It's got Detroit in it and again, some of the other areas. It's the heaviest population area. There was as I understand it, there's a 4-member canvassing board, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. They met, I want to say on Tuesday, maybe Monday. I think it was Tuesday. And they had a preliminary vote on whether to certify, and they deadlocked.
Right.
And there wasn't some giant number that was wrong. There was a whole lot of little stuff that didn't add up. It's like almost nowhere. It was over 70% of them just didn't match.
Right.
And sometimes it was a small mistake, but the Republicans were saying no. And then apparently they had a public meeting and they were kind of berated and called racist and threatened for a couple of hours. And then they agreed to change their votes and they certified it, subject to some sort of a resolution that they'd ask the Secretary of State to come in and do some sort of audit.
Right.
And then shortly after that, apparently the Secretary of State said, well, I don't have to do that. And then the very next day, they put out affidavits saying, we rescind our approval.
Right.
And it's not clear whether they're allowed to do that, quite honestly. I mean, it's kind of like if you're a congressman and you vote for a bill and then it passes, and then the next day you say, I rescind my vote. It's like, the vote's over. So it's not clear they can do it procedurally, but it is important that there's at least something fishy going on in the most populous state, the most populous county in Michigan.
Yeah.
Which at least could conceivably pick up, they need 154,000 votes to swing.
Yeah.
But maybe. They were talking about, I can't remember, I think it was something in the 600,000 votes that they were just not going to certify.
Yeah.
Right.
It wouldn't be counted at all.
That would be the city of Detroit, and that makes sense.
Yeah. So, okay, that's the angle in Michigan.
Yeah.
Now, Michigan doesn't get you there. You would need Michigan and 2 others.
Right.
And it's kind of I think any 2 others would work there except for, Michigan, Nevada.
Yeah.
Might need 4, but any of the biggies, I think.
Everything I'm hearing
Michigan,
about Nevada is it's a classic Rottenborough syndrome. They just sent out ballots and individuals filled them out. I don't think there was any kind of like the Wayne County Commission, and then the Wayne County commissioners looked away because they're all Democrats. It's a bit of the old Harry, Harry Reid controlled that state, and he still sort of does. And unfortunately, I think that's what happened about it. I don't think there was any kind of like large scale effort to do it. They just there's a really ugly racial angle to some of these.
votes.
Mhm.
I mean, if a bunch of votes get thrown out in Detroit,
Mhm.
that's going to be overwhelmingly black.
Mhm.
If it's in Philly, not as much, but Philly's pretty heavily black, as I remember. I haven't looked at the numbers,
Mhm.
and I'm guessing Atlanta is too. You know, so those are places where, you know, Milwaukee probably less so.
My
I've never
understanding
been-
it's like 5% of the population. They have a very small black population in Milwaukee.
Yeah. So, you know, if that's the angle, my gosh, you know, I think it should be called the 1619 riots
Mhm.
might pick right back up.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about the various procedures and the mechanisms for resolving this? I don't know how much everybody knows about those. You know, I'm the
I have some
lawyer and
idea.
I
I've
looked
been
them
getting
up.
kind of a crash course in the last month.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So the electors are supposed to get selected in early December. They're supposed to meet and vote. I think it's December 14th.
Right.
And then pretty promptly after that, the executive of each state is supposed to send the certificates of how they voted to Congress. Technically, he sends it to the archivist, okay? He or she, whoever the election official is in the state. There can be court challenges, although it's not clear to me that the courts are actually supposed to be playing this role,
Mhm.
which is weird, right?
Mhm.
Something that's happened in our country is people have come to think that the courts ought to resolve everything. And as a lawyer, I guess that's good for my business, but
Mhm.
that's not actually the way the Constitution's written. The courts are supposed to decide things within the judicial power, and the executive is supposed to decide things within the executive power, and the legislature is supposed to do their job. And if a court were to order a tax to be imposed, you'd say, no, only Congress can pass taxes, then it's got to initiate in the House, by the way. Who do you think you are? If the Supreme Court handed out a ruling like that, Donald Trump ought to send the frickin' marshals to throw him in jail. You don't get to, I mean, he'd just have to disregard it, actually.
Yeah.
They don't get to do that.
Yeah.
There's a serious danger of judicial tyranny in this country because we don't have a good answer to it. But it's not clear to me that the courts certainly aren't the only place. A lot of people think the Supreme Court has to decide. It's like, no. The state executives have to decide whether or not they're going to certify their electors.
Mhm.
There's a good argument that the state legislatures can step in and say, you know, the Constitution actually says the legislature appoints the electors.
Right.
And we've passed a procedure for doing that where we've delegated that to the voters, but we can take it back. And so that's a possibility.
Can they withhold their electors? Like, say, if they do believe there was like massive fraud, can like a state do that?
They don't, because that's what I was pointing out earlier that Rubio was saying in 2000. They can just say the election's bogus and send in their own electors. Now, some states, it depends on different states. My understanding, in some states, the governor could then send their own delegates off as well. And who knows how, I don't think anyone knows how that would be resolved.
Well, I can tell you. I don't know how it would come out in a particular case, but I can tell you the procedures.
Mhm.
So there's a certain set deadline by which the executive of each state has to certify how the electors voted.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, it doesn't mean the votes aren't accepted if they're not sent in like that, but it gives them an advantage when counting time comes.
Mhm.
If they're certified by the quote, executive of each state, unquote, or maybe it's executive in each state.
Mhm.
Doesn't actually say the governor.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure whether it might be a different person,
Mhm.
which could be relevant in my state because we got a Republican governor but a Democrat Secretary of State.
Right.
I don't know. Anyway, so votes are sent.
I think actually your governor has come out and publicly stated he's not going to certify. So I'm going to guess he has the authority in your state.
Well, but who knows? That could
Yeah,
be
that's
another
true.
court challenge.
Mhm.
And then it's not clear whether the Supreme Court would be the one who gets to decide that either. So let me shake out how it goes.
Yeah.
So a possibility is a state executive can send in the results in a timely fashion. The executive could send in the results in an untimely fashion. The executive might choose to not send anything at all. And then maybe somebody else sends it in. Maybe the legislature sends a different slate. Who the heck knows? You might get more than one from each state. That happened in 1876 for 3 states, if I'm remembering right. James, you're the amateur historian. Is that?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was 3 states where there were 2 slates, and they were split, and Hayes had to get all 3 of them to win, and then he did.
Yeah.
Kind of the compromise.
Yeah, they actually called Tilden first, and then it was, it was overturned after that. So.
Yeah. So anyway, then the votes arrive, and they go to somebody named the Archivist of the United States, and I have no idea who that is, but they're just supposed to hold them. And then January 6th rolls around, and the whole Congress assembles, House and Senate, and Mike Pence presides, and they open the ballots, state by state, in alphabetical order, beginning with A. The statute actually says that. I don't know why they thought they had to say that. But, it's strangely specific in some ways and unspecific in others. So,
yeah,
Alabama.
I remember that your founding fathers, especially when it came to Virginia, were coming up with all kinds of things because they thought Virginia was just going to try and dominate everything.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be
So
surprised.
anyway, you got these, Alabama. What do you got? Bring forth the Alabama votes. And and maybe there's one, and maybe there's more than one. If there's one, and it's certified by the executive of the state, they open it up, they say what it is. Okay? Congress can object. It's got to object in writing, and it has to be signed by 1 senator and 1 representative. If it's not, it's out of order, and we don't hear it. It's just automatically accepted. Okay? The vote's contested, then they got to decide. And I think the rule is this, although it's drafted kind of strangely. If the vote was certified by the executive of the state and was sent by the proper deadline, then it requires both houses to overturn it in order for it not to count. But otherwise, it requires both houses to accept it for it to count. So that's the importance of the timely certification, I think. Okay, because it kind of gives you a presumption of validity. And in voting this way, the houses separate, and it's not the House voting state by state. It's each congressman gets 1 vote, each senator gets 1 vote, and then you see how it turns out. So that's the situation. And then either the vote is accepted or the vote's not accepted. And so, possibilities are you might deadlock, and they say, we got 2 returns from Pennsylvania and we don't know what to do. And we're not accepting either of them. But on the other hand, if one of them is timely and certified by the governor, then it looks like under the statute, and this is a statute, this piece isn't in the Constitution. Under the statute, the House would have to agree to throw it out, as well as the Senate. So that's how weird it could get. And some of them might not be counted at all. And you don't have to have just a majority of the votes cast. You have to have 270. So you don't actually have to flip a state. You just have to make sure it lands in the trash. And that's good enough. Now I feel like I'm talking like science fiction or worse.
No. It's just like, it's so fascinating and arcane and weird.
Yeah. But here's the thing, I think at the outset, one of the guys said, we don't have, it's like, we got an amazing procedure for dealing with this.
Yeah, that sounds so.
And so then if no one's selected in the Electoral College vote, what happens? We talked about that briefly before. The House votes by congressional delegation. And those of you who joined late didn't get the numbers, but I reviewed where things stand. Iowa still remains undecided as to who's going to control the delegation. That's not quite right. It's either going to be a tie or it's going to be Republican control. Okay. So delegation by delegation, the Republicans are going to have either 26 or 27. So assuming all the Republican delegations would vote for Trump, he'd win.
Yeah.
The Democrats have only 20 because there are 3 that are tied right now, and Iowa might be tied.
Yeah.
So it's almost hopeless for the Democrats to win. Although, you know, let me see. Well, where's Pennsylvania? Pennsylvania. Oh no, Pennsylvania's tied. So we're not counting on Pennsylvania. So that's how it would go. And then maybe they'd pick someone and maybe they wouldn't. And if they don't, the vice president is picked differently.
Yeah, the Senate, I believe, picks the vice
The
president.
Senate picks them.
That would
And
be
then-
Harris.
It would pick them before the Georgia primary elections. So
Okay.
that means that the Republicans have the majority there.
Right.
Well, it gets more complicated. Technically, it's the day after the election in Georgia, but I don't expect it to be certified. So I would, if I were the Georgia governor, I'd be fixing to reappoint anyone I need to reappoint on January 3rd to fill that vacant seat until the runoff election is determined. In which case, we could have 2 Republicans from Georgia, and then that's a nice 52-48 margin.
Yeah.
And so then Pence gets selected vice president, presumably. Have you guys read my crazy Pence gambit idea? I don't know how much people read of my crazy music.
What's your crazy Pence gambit idea?
So the Pence gambit is, it ends up either in a tie at the Electoral College, or it ends up with no one getting a majority because some aren't even counting.
Yeah.
And so it's thrown to the House, and the House deadlocks. And they just don't pick anybody to be president. But the Senate picks Mike Pence to be vice president. And then January 20th at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, I presume, the President Trump's term ends, and and there's a statute, Presidential Succession Act.
Yep.
And it says, if there's not a qualified president, then the vice president becomes president. Essentially, it says, I think it says technically acts as president, but we've established that actually means becomes president.
Right.
You know, that was John Tyler, right?
Right.
Yep.
So you could have Pence.
Okay. Oh, wow.
You want to play it out further?
Like I said,
Pence can then appoint a vice president. Who would he appoint?
Oh, oh no. Doesn't he have to get passed to an approve? Doesn't the vice president have to be confirmed by the Senate?
Yes.
I think it has to be approved by a majority of both houses.
Okay.
So, wouldn't that be hysterical? Pence becomes president, Trump becomes vice president. I told my wife this last night. It's the Trump lover's ultimate dream.
Well, but
You
if
get
it
Pence
has,
Trump for 2
if it-
years in one day. And then Pence resigns. And Trump becomes president. And then Trump reappoints Pence as vice president. And then Trump serves out 2 years of this term. And then he's actually qualified to run one more time. So we could get 9 years, 364 days of Donald Trump.
You know what? Let's see it, because 100 years from now, there's going to be an asterisk next to this election anyway. So let's
Oh,
just
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That is just the
bring it on.
craziest science fiction story. It's actually correct. It's like, this could happen.
It is
As far as I
possible.
can
I
tell.
think it. I'm personally
It's
betting it goes to the
unbelievably
House.
unlikely. But
My personal
Is that a
bet
fun
is this
one?
is going to the House.
you're making my head hurt.
this is how I spend my time.
Yep.
If 2021 follows 2020 with this, I don't know if I'm going to celebrate New Year's.
All right. I got one more theory to raise with you, unless someone else wants to talk about something serious.
No, go ahead. I think we can use some levity at the end.
I only thought of this right before we got online, and I made a note. So the theory is the presidential candidate with the shorter last name always wins.
Okay.
Yeah. So it turns out if you go back to 1980, 6 times the candidate with the shorter the shorter last name won. Trump beat Clinton. Obama beat Romney. Reagan beat Mondale. Count the letters. Yeah. 2 times the person with the longer last name did win. It was Bill Clinton. But those were those weird Ross Perot years. So unless you have a third party candidate,
Reagan Carter is
it's
the
going to
same.
hold.
I'm trying to think in my head. Reagan.
Mondale,
Ford.
He beat Carter first.
he beat Carter. So Reagan Carter is a tie.
Okay.
6 letters each.
Yep.
As
So
is Bush v. Gore.
Yep.
As is Trump v. Biden. So when it's a tie, 2 out of 3 times we've had it unresolved.
Yep. Carter.
Because it's all about people not liking long, complicated names.
Yep. I mean, Carter beat Ford. I guess that was when they started to change their mind the one time.
Yeah. Dave, you don't understand. That's why I carefully selected 1980 as my start.
Yeah.
Now you can take it back further because you might ask, how did Eisenhower win?
Well, no, because
okay.
I'm pretty sure that guy, the other guy, had an even longer name.
It was Adlai
Stevenson.
Stevenson. It was a tie. Both times.
Yeah, another little thing I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about is the fact that Ricochet has been not allowing most of the posts go to the main feed. I get it. I'm getting in fights with Dahlia, and no one on the main feed needs to see any of those things. I don't know what it is about that guy who drives me so crazy, but but I mean, Jerry, some of your posts on this analysis, they should clearly be on the main feed, and they're not putting them up. And I just feel like the community is starting to get this kind of little suppression anxiety, and I wanted to hear from the rest of us of what we think of what's going on right now.
I'll jump in. I thought the post that Augustine did, that was like what did they get, like 110 comments and like 40 likes or something like that, and that didn't get promoted. And I thought that was an excellent thread. She debunked a lot of theories on both sides. I thought it was very fair. And I think that was the one that was originally the one that Yeti jumped in on about like the conspiracy theories, or am I thinking about a different thread?
The one that I was talking to on the posted today was not the St. Augustine one.
It was not that one. Okay. But yeah, I don't know. I think that kind of does a disservice to like the research, because I mean, none of us are pretending that we know everything about it, but like just, the overall suppression of big tech and of course the corporate media, which, we're all well aware of. I don't want to see that in our little community here, because I like Ricochet. I don't want to see it go down that road.
Well, my thought is, while I do get a little, burst of joy from getting promoted, it's not why I write the stuff. I mostly don't even write it for y'all. I write it for me. I mean, I want to vent. It's really nice that there's at least some of you out there who will listen to me or read what I wrote, and I'll do that same to you. And it makes you feel a little less cut off in some ways. I mean, I got people in my life I can talk to, but it's an interesting group of people. And then it is some pretty fun back and forth.
And on that though, Jerry, like I think we do have a lot of very intelligent people that post here and do a lot of great research. And like for me personally, I like to share a lot of that, and I can't share anything, unless it's promoted to the main feed. So
okay.
Right.
Kind of it would be nice to be able to get that kind of information out there. And that's my.
Where would you share it?
Just if I send something to my family members or friends or something that are.
Or you like email a link?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Look what so and so says about this or something along those lines.
Okay. I was gonna say, if you're sharing junk on Facebook or Twitter or any of these,
No,
Evil Empire sites, just don't even use them. I
don't.
never look at them.
I quit a long time.
Good.
I rarely go to the main feed. I'm always on the member feed. And now that I've discovered the pit,
Yep.
I've been there
I've
a lot.
stayed out of the pit. And I have a reason. I was always a Star Trek fan, but I've never gone to a convention because I'm afraid that would just be bridge too far. But y'all have fun in the pit?
I'm not sure.
It's just one long drawn out conversation of posts, like an old board somewhere, and you just don't see that anymore. I used to be on ComSim World, which was a war gaming kind of thing, and I would be trying to keep up with conversations about my favorite war games, and the pit is just the same thing. It's just like you hit update and there's like 50 new posts.
Gotcha. So I don't, back to the main point about promotion. I mean, sometimes I write something that's pretty good. It gets a lot of, likes, and then it doesn't get promoted. And I know very well why.
Yeah.
I had one a couple days ago where I went after, Adam White pretty hard. He's one of the guys that does the reasonable disagreements. And I can see why, I was pretty rough on him. A little rude because he was rude.
Yeah, I did that once after Trump got elected, and what's his name? He's the one who talks to you all the time, and he just came out and he wrote this ridiculous post saying Trump should resign immediately. And I had 100 likes on my answer, but I knew why it was never getting put on the main feed.
Oh,
Is that Gary?
No, that's
Gary
Value.
Robbins.
no, not Gary Robbins. No.
Okay.
No, this was
Law Talk, right?
yeah, the Law Talk podcast. So the other guy there, his name escaped me.
Oh,
John
Epstein?
Yoo.
Yeah, so that Richard Epstein wrote this ridiculous piece saying that Trump should immediately resign because of something, and it was like, you can't do that. This is what are you thinking? And I just really
No, I
laid
like
into him.
Epstein. Epstein's actually come around for the most part.
Oh yeah, he's much better now.
You had to give him some time.
Yep.
Yeah, I like Epstein's. I like a lot of this stuff. It's just, I don't know, like when I see things like that, like what you just mentioned, David, about resigning less than a day into office, it's like I don't know where these people are coming from. It's like I live on a different planet or something.
Yeah, I think we lost this election 4 years ago when half our people felt like they just couldn't support Trump, which gives the Democrats motive to feel like they can get away with almost anything. And then you get to where we are now 4 years later, and we're saying, well, Trump could do this and he could do this, and then the electors can do this. Well, the voters out there, all these people out there believe that Trump's a fascist, that he cheated to get the first win, and all of this is going to play into what they believe because we let the media control the narrative for 4 years, and our people were more than glad to roll over, and a bunch of them even now are rolling over. Unless you stand up and fight, you're not going to win these things no matter what you do.
Well, I attribute it more to COVID.
Right.
No, seriously. What if 2020 had happened without COVID?
Huh. No, none of this would have happened.
Right. No pandemic, no 250,000 dead people.
He would have won 40 states.
Yeah. Fair or unfair, if a tragedy hits, it's always going to peg the incumbent a little bit. That's just reality.
I think the problem
we have
is
this economic catastrophe, which we've sailed through amazingly well so far. I've just been shocked that we haven't collapsed. It's quite impressive.
Oh, give it.
We had what was it? GDP down at a 30% annual rate in the second quarter. I mean, it was really just a 9% drop, but 9% in one bloody quarter. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And
Hey,
that
Mark,
giant
I think
spike
Mark
in
wants to say
unemployment?
something here, Jerry.
Oh,
And yet Trump's in the fight. How does he do that? Without that, it would have been a stomp.
Yeah.
it was
Mark,
just
you wanted to
a
say
snarky
something?
comment that the economy will crater next year once all the new regulations go in. So the only good news is that I can go on full Social Security next year.
I'm already
So-
there.
Well,
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Skinner.
in 1957, during that pandemic, there was a 10% drop in a quarter and came right back. And it was the last there was. No shutdowns, none of this other talk. I think the difference between 10 and 30 is the shutdown, is the regulations.
Yeah.
I'm going to say what I think really happened here is that they were fooled and lulled in by their poll numbers that were skewed. They saw the breaking coming down the last minute, and these guys thought they can steal 2% in an election. You know, you can play around with the margins and you can get your 2%. But when the real Trump vote came out and they underperformed everywhere, and they just were at 2 a.m. in the morning going like, what do we do? Well, we're ready to do this steal. We're going ahead with it. And they had to steal 15 points in Pennsylvania. They had to steal like 10 in Michigan and other places. And that's why it's like so noticeable.
Right.
Now, I don't know if Trump will be able to pull it off. Personally, I think Trump is like America. What did Churchill once say? God blesses drunk fools in the United States of America. And Trump seems to be that, blessed in that kind of thing. With all the things he's done, all the screw ups he's made, all the people that he's thrown under the bus to try and get to where he's going. And he's going to pull off some interesting things. I think if he does lose, he's going to first say, well, I accomplished everything I wanted to do anyways my first term. And then every month he's going to do a rally where he just talks about Biden stealing the election. And tens of thousands of people are going to come up to go watch those things. And he's not going silently into that good night like a Romney or a Bush. Like, he will be on this until Biden is gone.
Well, the one thing I'll warn people about is I'm pretty sure that there will be some type of, if you'll excuse the expression, trumped up charges against Trump made, probably from New York, to make sure he can't run again. And yeah, I'm talking third world country behavior, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. Oh yeah. One of the things I do think is going to happen, I think he's going to blanket pardon half his administration, and there's going to be boxes of pardons coming in, and he's just going to be signing off all sorts of crazy federal pardons.
Right.
And then he's going to pardon his entire family, and Pence resign on the last possible day and watch Pence sign his pardon.
But he can only pardon for federal offenses.
Oh, I know. But those are the ones he's going to care about. None of these ones that will come up in state charges he's just got the money to stay in there, and that won't last.
I don't know. You got a point. If he has to like run overseas, that's Banana Republic stuff.
Right.
And I was thinking it's also that is historians, James and others. Isn't that the thing that actually led Caesar to cross the Rubicon?
Yes.
Yep.
He was dismissed from his proconsulship in Gaul or whatever it was, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
and ordered back to Rome, and his immunity from prosecution was gone, and he knew he was toast.
Yeah.
And so it was like, I'm marching. I'm taking over.
Looking at
That
what's
gets scary. I hope the other side has the wisdom not to do that.
If you look at
No,
what's
they
going on
don't.
now, and you
They don't.
compare it to like 1800, John Adams was a one-term president, right? And when he was in his lame duck session, he did a lot on the way out. I mean, that's how he got Marshall appointed, and a lot of other things. So, and he was thought the election was stolen from him. He was a miserable person kind of to begin with, but he was very, very miserable during those last few months. And you can kind of see that with the Trump administration as well. So if Trump wants to, I mean, he could really be like a bull in the china shop that they kind of thought he was originally going to be when he went into office. I mean, he could go.
He could pull the United States unilaterally out of NATO.
Yep, declassify things, and I'm all for it. I mean,
Yep.
if he's going to go down fighting, and then what you mentioned before about him like leaving the country, I mean, I don't think it's going to come to that.
No.
And I do think that there's more than one way to lead outside of governance. So, if he does go, and start his own media empire, or or something like that.
Yeah.
He's already done a lot of good, even though we might not see the effects of it right away, as far as like blowing up the mainstream media, blowing up big tech, sowing distrust in these institutions with with the general population. I mean, that's a good thing. You have a lot more people now that are questioning, kind of what they've been fed all the time.
What I wonder is when is the left wing empire, media, academia, Democratic Party empire of lies going to finally collapse? I mean, for crying out loud, Ben Shapiro is now an anti-Semite, and I think Candace Owens is a white supremacist, according to these people.
Yep.
They are so deranged, and you'd think that they would be getting red pill.
Well, Jerry, a lot of these problems, I think, come from the public education system. So one thing that we can maybe take from this whole COVID shutdown thing is that we can maybe put a dent in that armor. And, if you get more kids out of those schools, because I mean, half of these parents don't even know what the rules are from week to week, right? It's like,
Right.
hey, I've got a job. I got to figure out what I'm going to do with my kids. Do they eventually just say, screw it, and I'm going to send them to a private school that doesn't go through all this stuff, or am I going to homeschool? That's another thing where you might not see the results immediately, but you might have, like, a little bit of hope for the future generation to kind of resist this brainwashing.
I'll have hope when the illegitimacy rate starts going down.
Right.
It's been skyrocketing my whole darn life. And I don't know any way. That's the one thing that gives me despair, because that has been getting worse and worse and worse. And I think it's not the root cause. I think it's the second most important cause.
Yeah.
I think that's caused by the breakdown of faith. And I don't know how to fix that.
Yeah.
Faith has broken down before and it's come back.
Or what is
Things
it?
don't go
Yeah,
well
yeah,
until
but-
it does come back.
Yeah, and sometimes it involves the Babylonian captivity, as I recall, which isn't quite so enjoyable to
Yeah, I don't look
contemplate.
forward to that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I wander.
Yeah. My worry is, of course, as I said at the end of my piece with Blue Yeti, and he said, like, I said something to the effect of, like, they stole an election from 80 million people will have guns. And he says, that's a threat. And I'm like, no, that's a warning. I've read enough history books to see where your country is at. And normally it can get out of these things, but if they continue on this path,
Well,
bad things will happen.
You don't ever win, as Michael Walsh says about the left. They never stop, they never rest, they never sleep.
Right.
well, remember the 4 boxes: the soap box, the jury box, the ballot box, and the cartridge box.
Mm.
Mhm.
If you look through history too, you really don't see any like revolutions, so to speak, from the right. Like, all the revolutions come from the left wing. Going back to the Soviet.
Well,
I will point out on this. So many of the right wing, the counter revolutionaries win 99% of the time.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I was kind of listening to like some philosophy stuff earlier. And when you think about violence and like chaos, that all comes from the left, right? But the right is more force and order. And that always wins out in the end. You just kind of have to poke the bear with a stick enough and then it's over. You know?
I'll point out a couple of exceptions. I don't think that you can say the Confederacy was a creature of the left. I'm not sure you could say it was a creature of the right either.
No.
But that was definitely a revolutionary movement. And a few years ago, I reviewed a book called Our Man in Charleston and another one called Madness Rules the Day, which examined the political origins of the Civil War. And there are some very disquieting similarities between what was going on in South Carolina in 1859 and what the Democrats are doing today.
Right.
And there are a lot of wars that are started because people never imagined that what they could do would end up starting a war.
Right.
So, and
well,
the other
to
thing is
James'
that,
point,
remember
I
that
don't think the American Revolution was left wing.
Well,
I mean, you
Gary,
might
I
have
don't
called,
think that
that was
think
like,
Americans had a revolution. I think that's kind of like a bad term for what actually happened. Because
okay,
when you think of revolution, you think of overthrowing something, right? But there was a lot of things as far as like the parliamentary common law system and like the culture that we wanted to keep. We just wanted better representation in government. So it wasn't that we were overthrowing Britain. We just wanted to be on our own. So
yeah.
yeah,
But that's what a
also
conservative
out.
revolution looks like, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
It would inherently be, we're overthrowing something in order to basically stay the same.
Yeah.
I'll
Right.
also point out that with the American Revolution, what they were doing is following a tradition that had occurred many times in Britain itself. They did not, when it started, they did not view themselves as Americans. They viewed themselves as Englishmen, and they were pushing back hard to keep the rights of being an Englishman, which included representation.
Yeah, they had just given you MPs. A lot of the stuff would have been addressed. I don't know
Exactly.
if it would people. Some of the hardline revolutionaries were like against
Right.
that because they knew what it meant. But I mean, if you just gave, from what I could tell, every state an MP and then gave Virginia two, that
Yeah.
would have solved a lot of problems.
Right. Well, the
Why are you
thing
being so nice
is,
to those
when I wrote my book about George Washington,
Mhm.
I did a real deep dive in that. And one thing that I discovered was that until the king issued the Proclamation of Rebellion in 1775, the Americans viewed this as a faction fight between them and one of the parties in Parliament,
Right.
rather than as a revolutionary movement. So the Texas Revolution was more of a pure revolution.
Mhm.
The
Yeah.
American Revolution was, it's like I said, its roots lie in the glorious revolution of 1688 in England, and actually a few of the things before that. So
Yeah. Well, Mark, getting back to your main point, I'm not on board for a violent revolution.
well, neither am I, but that
I
doesn't
get-
mean we'll avoid it.
Well,
Right.
but if it's going to be our side launching it, my answer's no. I mean, unless they start putting people in gulags.
Mhm.
But, you can. This is rhetoric that scares me. You start talking about the cartridge box, and it's like, once upon a time, the government didn't have smart bombs,
Mhm.
and the government didn't have nukes, and the government didn't have stealth bombers. And if you think that, look at, I got a gun safe full of my weaponry. Okay.
Mm.
If there was a bunch of Antifa jerks coming toward my house, they'd be in trouble.
Mhm.
My son's a Marine. If his platoon was coming toward my house, I have no chance.
Well,
And I don't
yes,
know what the military would do. But if you
Yes.
game this out, what I think is, instead of having a revolution in the street, a more likely move would be some sort of declaration of resistance by the states on the aggrieved side.
Yeah.
Either way, like if somehow it ends up being Trump, California might just say, we're not going to war, but we're not following the US law anymore.
right. The thing
We're doing
is
our own
that
thing.
Turn to
if
federalism.
this did,
Yeah,
if this
and
did go
Texas
to
could do the same thing on the other side.
Yeah.
Right,
And I
if
think that will
this-
happen.
if it
Kamala
did go to
becomes president.
shooting, though, what you might see instead is the rural areas cutting off the urban areas. If they blew the aqueducts feeding LA and San Francisco, what would be the result of that if they blew the power lines going in? You have to remember, the big cities, you don't have power plants in big cities anymore. You don't have the water sources in big cities.
Yeah.
You don't have manufacturing there.
Hey, Mark, I think this can be a little fascinating, and we may want to do a separate show on how you can do a guerrilla warfare, but I don't want to get too bogged down
Right,
in that stuff.
Right. I don't think that's going to happen at this point.
I was going to say,
unless they get really, really
Like if they try to steal to get rid of the Second Amendment, which is like Kurt Schlichter's books.
Right.
Yes, I could see that, but I don't think that's going to happen.
you're seeing early stages of this kind of with,
Yeah.
I
We're
don't know
very early in the stages.
if you guys have been keeping up with this, but like if you look at like what some of the truckers unions are doing as far as like threatening strikes with like going into some of these cities.
Mhm.
So I mean that kind of ties into that. If you choke people
Yeah.
out from their supply chains, then
that's really what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like I
Look,
said,
So
a
we could have a
Biden
whole episode on
administration,
that.
a Biden administration is not going to be able to do anything monumental.
Yeah.
Their best
No.
case scenario is sitting right now. If they win everything that's still undecided, they take the Senate by 50-50 with Kamala. Sorry,
Yep.
I'm a racist for mispronouncing her name.
You and
I know,
Mr.
it's a
Biden.
joke. With Harris casting the hypothetical Vice President Harris, which is likely, casting the deciding vote. If they have Joe Manchin going along with it. Joe Manchin's not going to do anything nuts.
Yeah.
I'm loving Joe Manchin right now. I don't know why this guy's not in our party. I love this guy.
Well, I think you've hit on the best way to fix these elections is to make all the money they spend get them nothing in return, even if they win the White House.
yeah,
That you elect people to Congress who will have the balls to stand up against them and say, no, you're not going to do this.
yeah. I'll admit I'm more worried about what the left is going to do than the right, because for people that quote won an election, they sure seem to be pretty angry about the result. I can see a lot of executive orders going out and being ignored. If Biden, for example, issued a nationwide lockdown, Texas would ignore it.
Florida's already said they're not going to do anything.
Yeah. So, but it's like I said, it could get very, very ugly. And I've seen it. I mean, I write about history too, and a lot of this is leaving me, very uneasy, I guess would be the best way to put it. There are just too many analogies between 1859 and 2020. But again, remember, it was the Democrats that ended up pushing things to the limit in 1859, not the rest of the country.
Yeah, but we got through it in 1800, and we got through it in 1820. We got through it in 1876, and frankly, 2000.
Right.
That was ridiculously close, and we got through it okay.
Right.
Maybe I don't know if you guys are running out of time. The one last thing we might talk about is how to fix it, and I've got a really radical proposal.
Okay, go ahead.
We end, I think it's called the Australian ballot. We end the secret ballot.
Whew.
You vote openly. Now, hey, look, we put in our tax returns and they're mostly kept secret.
Right.
Okay, so it's not insane to think, I know not always, but it's not insane to think that it could be protected reasonably well. But that's how you solve voting fraud. You got to have your danged, your name, your birth date, your social security number, and your dang thumbprint.
I got a somewhat of a different solution, Jerry. I think
That's radical, but
one of the biggest, I mean, not necessarily connected to like the voting issue, but one of the biggest problems we have right now is you've got 51% versus 49% or vice versa, where there's almost nothing in common between those two sides anymore. So I think like the best answer to that is just to kind of, I mean, it's hard to say now, but like if we actually went back to federalism where you don't have California telling Oklahoma what to do, and it's like if you go back to states' rights where it doesn't even really matter who the president is, I mean, that would go a long way towards kind of healing some
Yeah.
of this divide, where you still have a federal republic as far as our defense and, you know, all the military bases that we've established in all these states and whatever, but it's not like a one size fits all solution to all problems. So maybe one state does allow abortion, right? And then another state doesn't. And then we're not rioting when a new Supreme Court justice is nominated, you know? So if we kind of decentralize and break things down more into like local governance, and I think that's like our biggest hope for the future. And when I do see people talking about like nullification and secession and things like that, I think that's a healthy discussion, because I think it's, you know, the way that this republic was always designed to be. And I think that
Well,
can help a lot.
decentralized federalism did not prevent us from having a civil war.
Yeah.
So I'm skeptical of that. And then frankly, the game theory just doesn't work, James. I mean, I kind of like the idea, but the problem is, who's going to do that?
Yeah,
You're in power and you have to give it up.
I could do a
And then
whole
when you're not in power, the other side won't do it.
Yeah.
And who's going to enforce it? The bloody Supreme Court?
Jerry, this is another
I
like
love it, but I don't know how to get there.
Yep. Well, why don't we? That was his idea.
Yeah.
Skinner,
Yeah,
you have an idea?
I'd love it in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think I like both of them, but I don't think Jerry's is all that radical, because I heard George Will say that in the 90s.
Okay.
I know what the left is afraid of. They're not trying to ban the guns that are killing everybody. They're trying to ban the guns they think are coming after them.
Yeah.
The politicians.
Well, how about you? So you just want to like their two ideas, or do you have your one that you want to add there?
No, I don't.
I don't know how you roll back.
Yeah,
I got no ideas to
No.
fix the election fraud issue other than you don't get a secret ballot anymore. I
I
could live
think
with that.
we have elections that work here in Canada. Everyone else has elections that work. I mean, Brazil, I've been listening to some left-wing sources now, because of people who are angry progressives who hate Biden and everything he stands for. But one of the things is Glenn Greenwald's down in Brazil, and he points out this is how their elections work. It's all on a Sunday. Everyone has to show up and vote in person. There are cops on hand, as well as everyone, poll workers from all the 26 different political parties, and they count in 3 hours, and they're counting all day. And by when the election ends at 6 o'clock, they got 90% of the results already done, and they know the full results in 3 hours. There's no reason to see the kind of stuff we're happening down there.
Right.
in the States.
My feeling is I don't mind losing elections. I do mind losing elections that I feel were lost fraudulently. The easiest way to end this is to work harder on anti-fraud. And that means eliminating things like the mail-in ballots without signatures, absolute requirement that representatives from both parties have to be present whenever the vote is counted. Do what Texas does, which is have representatives from both political parties working each election spot. And if those rules are violated, you just toss out that precinct. I'm sorry, you know, there was potential fraud, therefore we can't trust that. Do that a couple of times and we would have clean elections. They can argue that, well, yeah, but you've disenfranchised the people in the precinct where there was potential fraud. But on the other hand, if you allow vote fraud, you're disenfranchising every other voter. So, you know, my feeling is you have to crack down on fraud before the election. You have to require the voter rolls to be cleaned up. You cannot allow voters that are 130 or 240 years old, New York City has 4,000 people that were that voted in 2016 who were born before the Civil War. You know, now it's possible they've got a large contingent of vampires living in New York City, but
I wouldn't put it past
I
them.
think that's only fantasy novels. So, but clean up the rolls, and again, you know, make sure you have representatives from both parties when the votes are being counted. And if one side gets kicked out by the party that's running the election in that precinct or that county, just throw out those votes. Do that a couple of times, and you know, I think vote fraud would be greatly diminished because there would be no profit in it.
Yeah. And touching off what Mark said, I'm also not as worried about losing elections, but losing the election process. That sets a very dangerous precedent, and you really do have to proactively kind of attack these issues, because once the cat's out of the bag, like what we're seeing right now, the chances are slim to none of, you know, getting something done this late in the game. Like you really have to address, you know, these potential fraud cases up front.
Yeah, you can't unscramble the egg.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, that's why I liked my idea, because it would let you unscramble the egg.
okay.
Well,
You,
the problem with that, though, is if you think people were reluctant to say they were going to vote for Trump, how reluctant do you think they would be to actually vote for Trump if they knew that their vote would be made public? And the thing is that the way things are working, if you look at the IRS, which tax returns are leaked? They're the ones that don't favor people, belonging to people that don't favor the Democrats.
Right.
And if you went to a non-private vote, non-secret vote, I would guarantee you the Democrats would win every election from here on out, because people would be too frightened to vote for someone like Trump.
Well, let me tell you something. You could put a really big sanction on any release of a vote.
There are big sanctions against releases of tax returns. There are big sanctions against using the IRS to bully political organizations. And none of that matters, does it?
Well, yeah, it does. Releases of IRS stuff is rare. But the sanction I actually had in mind is make the government pay you $500,000 if they do that to you.
Okay, that's a good
I mean,
idea.
no, seriously, it's like don't find the employee responsible. If it's released,
And
government pays,
Okay.
it's
and then let them make sure it doesn't happen. But anyway,
it's also not just the IRS too, but we're kind of seeing like the early stages of you know, like the big tech companies like freezing credit cards, canceling PayPal, and
Yeah,
things
the
like that.
social system in China is being played out here.
That's a
I'd
very
like to. We've been
Well-
talking 2.5 hours, so I'm going to hopefully ask Elizabeth here. What does she think needs to be done, and then maybe we can wrap up.
I think going back on what he said, it isn't that we're afraid of losing an election, we're afraid of losing the country. And we aren't the ones that are the agents of change that are causing that. And if the Democrats want to play that game, maybe they need to watch the movie Shenandoah with Jimmy Stewart to see how a civil war doesn't involve just the people in the military. It destroys the whole society. And then watch the first 20 minutes of Saving Private Ryan. But we need to keep doing what we're doing as far as electing these younger people to Congress to replace the older ones, people who have fire in their belly and they're willing to push back, and let them carry on the fight. Right now, we have too many people that roll over. Like y'all said, COVID was the problem. Well, who pushed back against the lies against Trump about COVID? I got hundreds of screenshots of the lies the Democrats were saying in Twitter about it, and you don't see any, you never saw any pushback about Trump. It's just like people on our side were willing to just sit back and let the Democrats do the dirty work. So we need to look at who's in Congress.
Okay. I think that's a great point. So why don't we wrap here? I think this is a great panel show. We should definitely do more of these in the future. Maybe we put some topics down on the group and see what we can come up with. Certainly think we have an interesting discussion with Mark here about urban guerrilla warfare in the future.
It wouldn't be urban guerrilla warfare.
Okay, sorry, rural warfare, but I think there will be urban as well.
The thing is that people don't realize how fragile infrastructure is.
Mm-hmm.
They're starting to learn.
I was in logistics for 20 years. I know exactly how bad it is. Okay, well, I think I want to thank everyone for coming out. I'm going to probably have this out tomorrow, I think, because I have to do some images of for Mark's and Elizabeth earlier and run this through the video editor. So, okay. Well, thanks for coming in, and we'll see you here. I think we definitely lived up to Land of Confusion. Thanks for coming out, guys.
All right. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks,
Yeah,
everyone.
bye.
Bye.